Hi everyone, this is Michael with Worlds in Comics, and as I'm recording this, we are about 1 month away from beginning our West Marches campaign, which we are going to run in our store in Kingston, New York. We already have quite a few players that are interested in signing up, and a few of them have contacted me about rules for making characters because they're excited they're excited about the new game and they want to start making a character. Now, and this video is for them to kind of show them the parameters for making characters because in West March's game, there are a few restrictions we have to make on how it's going to work. Now, you don't have to watch this video if you're new to D&D and you don't know how to make a character or anything like that. That's fine. We'll have all kinds of resources for you. You can make a character your first session. You can show up and we can spend the first half hour, 45 minutes, or however long it takes to make sure everyone has their character up and running. We can run it like that. Andrea, who's one of the co-owners, has expressed interest in having a special sessions just to do character creation so that new players can make their characters together and maybe learn a little bit about the mechanics of how to play D&D before people show up for an actual adventure session. So all of that's fine. You don't need this video at all. You can do all this stuff in person. But for those of you who are excited to get started, this video is for you. Okay, so how are we going to cut this up? It's going to be in parts. The idea is first to just give a slide that just has the facts. So if you know your D&D forward and backwards and you just want to know, okay, what are the rules? I'm going to give that to you in the very next slide. Then I go into a little bit more detail for a few slides talking about restrictions to mechanics. That is, which character classes and backgrounds and stuff like that are allowed. How are the numbers generated in this game? And how is this maybe different from just a home game where people can use whatever mechanics they like? And then character restrictions, that's to say role-playing restrictions. What kinds of personalities are allowed? Again, in a home game, maybe there are no restrictions. You just let players be whatever they want. But in West Marches, it really only works, since there's so many people playing, it really only works if we're all pulling in the same direction. So there are a few restrictions to the kinds of characters that you can make. So that's the main chunk. Then there is a bit for new players who want to start making their character, but maybe you've never done it before, or it's been a while, or you're new to this edition of Dungeons & Dragons. Then I talk about the main decisions that you make when designing a character, the main decision points. Which race, or we really should say species, do you pick? Which class, that is, what job does your character do in the party, and their background. What did they do before they were an adventurer? How do you determine those 6 ability scores that determine your character's interaction with the world? And how do you decide which skills that you have? And then a little bit about what's going to be allowed for starting equipment. All that's just to guide new players and help make this easier for them. If you're already a pro at this, then you really don't need to know any of this stuff. And then lastly, I talk a little bit about alignments, this mysterious thing that exists in Dungeons & Dragons, and other ways of trying to describe your character's personality if your character has a different personality than you. Okay, so that's the plan. So let's start first with just the facts. Okay, too long, didn't watch. Here's the important bit. We're only going to be using character choices that come from the Players Handbook, at least in the beginning. There are other things available out there. There are official source books that give other options for characters. There's homebrew out there. People have made up their own character options and put them up online. We're not going to use any of that, at least in the beginning. So make sure you're using Players Handbook stuff. And I guarantee you, as exciting as some of the stuff in secondary literature is, there's a fun character that you haven't played yet in just the options, the many options that there are in the Player's Handbook. So no homebrew, no using Xanathar's Guide or Tasha's Guide or any of that kind of stuff, at least in the beginning. There are 2 minor tweaks that almost will never come up, but if you're interested in what those 2 minor tweaks are, I'll talk about it in the next slide. Okay, next, just the basics. How do you get those 6 ability scores? I allow any of the methods that are listed at the beginning of the Player's Handbook. So there's a point buy method that's on page 13. There is the standard set where you're just given 6 ability scores, and you pick which number goes with which ability. Or there's the roll for it option, which I allow too. You must roll for your character stats in the presence of one of the game runners. You can't roll your stats at home and say, I rolled all 18s. We won't believe you. So if you're going to roll for stats, you have to do it in person. Okay. When it comes to what kinds of characters you can play, in 2 slides from now, I'll go into a lot more detail. Oh, by the way, if you don't understand anything I just said about ability scores, hold on. Later in this video, for new players, I will tell you what an ability score is and what all of these different options mean. But for now, I'm just giving the quick basics. You can't pick a character personality that would harm the other characters. That is, no one that's going to steal from the other characters. No one's that's secretly working against the other characters. Nothing tricky like that. I know it's fun to play characters like that. I've played a few characters like that. And if you have a group of people who know each other and trust each other, you can have all sorts of twists where, wait, that guy was working against us this whole time. That just doesn't work in West Marches. You have to be a team player. That doesn't mean you have to, you can't have quirks and you can't have an interesting character. You certainly can. But you can't be secretly opposed to the other characters. You can't be stealing from them in their sleep. That kind of weird stuff. And you also can't pick a character that would upset players. Remember, you don't necessarily know what kinds of lives the other players have been leading, and so don't pick something that would be, upsetting to someone that you don't necessarily know. So we'll talk about that in a couple slides too, about how to make sure that you're playing a fun character, someone that's interesting, but someone that is going to be fun for everyone, not just the person playing the character. Okay. Starting equipment. You get the starting equipment that is given by your class and your background in the Player's Handbook, and you will start with that equipment. I'm not one of those DMs that's going to, at the beginning of the game, take all your equipment away. If I was that kind of DM, then why would you even bother looking at that part of character creation? You will have the stuff that your class and your background says that you'll have. Okay. And lastly, in 5th edition, if you've never played it before, alignments, and along with ideals, bonds, and flaws, which is the new method for determining a character's personality, they really have no game mechanics associated with them. You don't have to be lawful good in order to be a paladin anymore. So your alignment is just there to remind you what your character is like. So in that sense, they're purely optional. Use whatever method you like to remind yourself the personality of your character. And if you don't know what alignment is, I'll talk about it at the very end of this video. But if you do know what alignment is and you think it's the most important thing you write on your character sheet, it can be for you. But just know that there's no game mechanic associated with it, and so whatever method you want to describe your character's personality is fine with me. Okay, that's the basics. If that made sense to you, then maybe watch the next 2 slides where I go into a little bit more detail, but then you're ready to start making your character. All right, now let's look at restrictions, mechanical restrictions to making your character. So like I just said, the main restriction is we're using the original Player's Handbook only. So if you have a Xanathar's guide and you have Tasha's, or you have Volo's guide, there are all these different guides that expand on character options. If you have those, and you've been dying to play your Kinku Hexblade or something like that, then I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to play that character, at least not at the very beginning of our game. You're going to have to pick one of the many combinations of options you can get from here. Other options may unlock during play. Maybe during play we'll come across a village of Kinku. Kinku, if you don't know, are kind of bird people. They are raven or crow people. And once that village is around, then from then on out, I guess if someone wants to play as that race, then go for it. Maybe we will find during play, maybe we'll find the Hexblade. And so if a player wants to be a Hexblade Warlock, then they can, using that item. But at least for the meantime, that stuff is off limits until it's discovered during play. But everything in here is okay. So you don't have to contact me to ask if it's okay for you to play any of the options in the Player's Handbook. They are available. If you're new to this, don't fixate on a particular fictional character you're trying to create. A lot of people will do this. If you're really into Star Wars or Harry Potter or whatever it is, you might Firefly, whatever you're into, anime, video games, whatever it is, you might think, okay, I'm going to start role-playing, but I'm really into this other fiction, and I want to play that character. I want to play Spider-Man. And you show up trying to create Spider-Man using the rules in this book. You're going to be disappointed for a couple of reasons. One is Spider-Man, those specific abilities aren't really able to be captured by the rules here. You can make someone that's as cool as Spider-Man, but no one with those exact features. And also, we're starting at level 1. No one at level 1 is a superhero. No one at level 1 is Dumbledore, right? And so if that's important to you that your character be Dumbledore, well then you'll have to change your mindset a little bit. You're going to be creating an absolute newbie character who may grow into a powerful wizard, but starts off not a powerful wizard. They're just someone set along that path. Your characters will be cool, but they have some ways to go before they are superheroes. Level 10 or so is when they start to be really superheroes. So don't fixate on a particular fictional character. The character you make in D&D, if you play along with it, you're going to like better than any fictional character anyway. And so you're better off having kind of an open mind, or maybe several different options for the kinds of fantasy character that you think you might enjoy. And trust me, you'll end up loving your character that you make, even if you didn't start with an idea of exactly how you wanted them to be. So keep an open mind when deciding on the mechanics for your character. I said there was 2 little tweaks to the Player's Handbook, the PHB, Player's Handbook rules. The first one is there are feats that you can take. Almost no one does this when they are a new player. Feats are a very optional part of D&D, and there's a whole list of them that at various times during your character's career you can take feats as an option. And I've ruled out one of them, the lucky feat, because it's annoying. It forces other people to re-roll, and that slows down the game, and I don't like it. Don't worry, there's like 30 other feats that you can choose from, but that one is off the table. Second tweak is something I'm including, not something I'm excluding. If you choose to play as a human, if you choose human as your species or race, then you have the option of replacing all of the human's racial abilities with this variation. You get a +1 to do different ability scores, you get 1 skill proficiency, and you get 1 feat. Hey, there's one way you can get a feat. You can get it if you play the variant human. If you don't understand what any of this means, again, don't worry. I'm going to describe what an ability score is, what a proficiency, all that I'm going to describe later in the video. I just opened this up to all the different races. So if you want to play as a dwarf, then you can be a variant dwarf, where what you do is you get rid of all of the racial ability bonuses and traits you get for being a dwarf. All of them, that is. And you basically become a variant human. You have exactly what a variant human would have. It's just you're a dwarf instead of a human. Why not? Why not say only humans are allowed to kind of build themselves from the ground up? I allow it for all the other races too. So if you want to play as a drow elf and you don't care about, you'd have to get rid of dark vision and sunlight sensitivity and all the stuff that are specific to that race. You get rid of all that, and instead you get what a variant human would have. That's it. Those are the restrictions to mechanics. Everything else is in here. Notice I'm not going through kind of describing how to pick any of these things. I assume the book is good at describing that. And if you don't have the book, you can come into Worlds and Comics. We have them for sale. Another option, if you don't want to spend money to do that, is to go online and go to the official Dungeons and Dragons site. They have, let me get me out of the way here. They have a basic rules set online for free that isn't the full Player's Handbook, but there's enough in here to make a character. See, here's step-by-step characters. Choose a race, choose a class, determine your ability scores, choose your equipment. So all the stuff I'm about to discuss, they give you. And then they don't list all the different races that you can pick, but they give you dwarf, elf, halfling, and human, so 4 of the main ones, and they give you 4 different classes to pick from. And so even without a book, you can start building a character using this free system online. And since everything that's in the Player's Handbook is okay, then everything in that online bit is okay, because that's a subset of what's in the Player's Handbook. Okay, that's character mechanics. Now, let's talk about the personality of your character. So, role-playing is a good way to play someone who's not you, who has different desires and interests than you do. And that's great. You can play as someone who... It's a good way to explore things, both people who are, more noble. I've played characters that were way more moral than I am, who sacrificed way more than I ever would for other people, and I've played despicable characters. I've played characters who've done evil things that I would never consider doing. There are all kinds of ways that the character can be different from the player. The character may be a despicable human being, whereas the player is a really good person. They just are exploring what it is to be that kind of character, the way that an actor might explore the role that they're playing. But remember that not everyone is at the table for the same reason. So if you want to explore something dark and evil or something like that, someone else might be there to escape that sort of thing and to have fun with their friends. And so while I think a home game around people that you trust is a great place for people together to kind of, if they want to, D&D can be a way to kind of explore together some dark themes. But that's not the way the West Marches works, at least not ideally. So for that reason, no one's allowed to play a character that would harm the other player characters. So again, no one who's going to backstab the other characters, who's going to steal, who's going to secretly work against the other characters. It's okay if the characters have different goals and reasons for adventuring. Maybe you want to go to the wizard tower because you want to stop the evil wizard, but another person wants to go to the wizard tower because they want to steal the power of the evil wizard. And a third person may have a completely different motive. But they all have to be on the same side. They all have to be on the same team. So when you think through your character, think about why would they be teaming up with everyone else? Why aren't they opposed to everyone else? And kind of restrict your characters to ones that will be team players. It doesn't mean they have to be friendly or anything like that, but they have to at least be capable of working together with other characters, right? Because that's what you're going to be doing for most of the game. No racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, etc. characters, right? Like I just said, just because a character has a despicable trait doesn't mean that the player does. So why not let there be characters that are despicable in these ways? Well, because, like I said, not everyone's at the table for the same reason. Maybe someone's been dealing with sexism all day, and they come to the table to get away from that. And so if your character is sexist towards other characters, it just brings it up for them. Note that this is true even towards fictional groups. So it's not just that you can't be racist towards real life in the real world groups. You can't be racist towards elves or tieflings or half-orcs. That's sometimes a part of the game. I mean, everyone knows, elves and dwarves often are racist towards each other, and that's, a stereotype part of fantasy fiction. But not in this world, not in the West Marches world. For the reason I just said, maybe people are tired of racism and they just want to get away from it, and even fake racism towards dwarves or elves may be all it takes to take them out of the game. It's not necessary to have groups be racist towards each other or to be hateful in order to have a full, rich fantasy world. It's something that can be dropped from the game without any real loss. And so we're going to drop it from the game, just so that everyone can be sure to have a good time. And everyone will feel welcome at our table. In addition to that, no stereotypes of real-world groups. It's great if you make up someone who has a different personality, a different background than you, but make sure that when you're doing that, you're not creating a character that is a bad stereotype of an actual real-world group. Here's a case where it's okay to be a stereotype of a fictional. You can be the gruff dwarf or the aloof elf or something like that, but don't pick a real-world culture and make a kind of offensive stereotype of that. That's another thing that's going to take other players out of the game, and we don't want that. And we're also going to avoid caricatures of real-world or fictional people. I know when I was young, we would make up characters that would be a pun on the name of a famous person, a famous actor or a politician, or a famous character from another work of fiction. And that's fun for about 5 minutes, but it gets old fast. Remember, you're going to end up loving your hero, your character, and so you don't want to end up with them having a silly name that you made up as a pun on some other thing going on in the world. So we're going to avoid characters of real world or fictional people as well. And after all, the person that maybe the politician that you're making fun of with your character's name is actually someone who's admired by another person at the table, and that's just not the kind of thing that's going to get good group adhesiveness. So that's it. Those are kind of the restrictions. That's the kind of thing that I think about when I'm making a character. Is it the kind of thing I'm going to have fun playing, but also is it going to be the kind of character that the other people at the table are going to have fun interacting with? Or is it going to be annoying for them to interact with your character? If so, then maybe think about one of the other many characters that would be fun for you to play. Okay, that ends sort of the discussion of the restrictions on characters. The rest of this is going to be talking mostly to new players and how to make your first character or a kind of character that's good for a beginner to play. There are a lot of options in here. Which options are good and fun for beginners? So like I said, everything in the Players Handbook is available, and there are races. There's the species that you pick. elves, dwarves, humans, halflings. They couldn't use the word hobbit because that belongs to the Tolkien estate, so they use halfling instead. And so all of the different species of sentient beings that exist in this fantasy world, they all exist, and so you can use any of them. Though in the book they give some description of what the personality and cultures are like of these groups. Now, when they're doing that, they're describing sort of the official D&D worlds. In fact, I think they're describing the Forgotten Realms world, which is a location that you can play D&D in that has its own cities and continents and cultures and all that kind of thing, characters that show up throughout. And we're not using that. We're making up our own for West Marches. And so even though the mechanics for dwarves and elves and halflings and all that are going to work exactly the way that is said in here, when it talks about where they live or what their cultures are like, that may be a little bit different in my world. And as we get closer to playing the game, I'll be able to talk more about the role of these different cultures in the world. So even though we're officially using this book, the flavor text, that is when it's not talking about a mechanic, it's talking about the culture, the personality of the different races. That may not translate perfectly into the game world. So be ready to be flexible a little bit with that sort of thing. If you're a new player, don't be afraid to play a human. Some of my favorite characters have been humans. There's a lot of variety in human. It's not boring. Think about the actual world, where humans are the only, well, at least that we know of, cultural species capable of language and culture and all sorts of stuff that make for a player character in D&D. Think of all the variety amongst humans in the real world. There's all kinds of characters you can play in there that are human. We understand humans because we are humans. We don't necessarily understand all humans, but it's easy to understand what a human motivation might be. So if you're making up a character, playing a human is fine. I mean, it's not boring at all. After all, you can play a human wizard or a human paladin or all these different fantastical things that you can be as a human. If, it's D&D after all, so if you want to play a non-human species, tieflings, half-elves, half-orcs are, at least in my world, they're related to human. They're either half-human or they share a common ancestry. And so they are really close to human, but still alien in sort of a fun way. Halflings are, like I said, like if you watch Lord of the Rings, you know kind of what halflings are like. They're not so alien that we don't understand what it is a halfling wants. And so I think all of those, if you want to play those, they're sort of easy to get into the role-playing of them if you want to play something non-human. Now, if you want to play an elf, dwarf, gnome, or dragonborn, that's going to be a little bit more work. I'm not saying don't do it. In fact, you can have a lot of fun doing it, but realize that these species have really alien motivations. They're not just like a different culture of humans. They're like aliens, a different species altogether, in a way that you're going to have to think about what that means for the decisions you make in the game. Now, if for you that's the juice, if that's what's fun for you, then yeah, by all means, dig into that. But if you want it to go light and not really, you just want to play a fun character, then humans, tieflings, halflings, half-elves, half-orcs, those would be easier at any rate. Okay, so that's the first decision you make. What race you want to play? What's next? Another big decision you make, maybe the biggest decision, is what class your character is going to be. That is, what job do they serve in an adventuring party? Are they the sneaky rogue? Are they the frontline fighter? Are they a wizard casting spells? Now, classes give you a set of combat mechanics and skills. They give you a set of things that your character can do. They usually often come along with a name that is suggestive of more than that. Barbarian, for example. When you hear the word barbarian, at least for me, I think of Conan. Coming down out of the hills without a shirt on, with a sword slung to his back. He's probably very strong, but not very smart. Now, while Barbarian gives you a set of skills, the barbarians draw on their rage, their primal rage when they're fighting. You don't have to play the stereotypical version of that class. That is, you could play someone that has a barbarian set of skills, but otherwise you would never really call a barbarian. Maybe she grew up in the city her whole life. She's never left the city. And she's a town guard. It's just when she fights against the criminals in the underbelly of the city, her rage overtakes her, and that's what she uses to fight against the criminals. Would you call such a person a barbarian normally? No, the name doesn't. In fact, the word barbarian is so loaded, it feels really kind of like a dysphemism, even if we're trying to use it in this nice way. So barbarian just means this set of skills. You don't have to play that kind of character. So you don't have to play a stereotypical version of class. All the classes are relatively balanced. There's not a bad choice. You can't pick the wrong class. None of them are broken. They all work. And they all work about relatively equally well. Some are better at low levels than others. Some are better at high levels than others. But you don't have to worry about that. Just pick one that is cool. Some, however, are easier than others. Some are easier when you're making your character to design them, and some are easier to play. I would say for first-time players, fighters and barbarians are pretty easy. Both of them are easy to build at first level. There's not a whole lot of decisions you have to make when you're designing a fighter or a barbarian when you're at first level. More decisions open up as you level up. At third level, fighters get a lot of choices to make. Barbarians get choices to make at third level and fifth level. There are all kinds of ways that you can make the character more complex. But for both of them, especially for fighters, you can keep it simple if you want to. There's always an option to keep the fighter really simple. That doesn't mean they are less powerful. Fighters can be very powerful, but they are easy to play. Of course, fighters and barbarians, at least at first level, are not spellcasters. So if you want something that is using magic from right off the bat, then you're going to have to play something that's a little more complex. Bards and sorcerers are the easiest to build, especially at level 1. Paladins kind of in there too. If you want to play a paladin, they're kind of in between a fighter and a spellcaster, and they are a little bit more difficult than a fighter or barbarian, but not too difficult. Clerics and warlocks, I would stay away from if you are a first-time player. They're fun characters to play if you know how to play D&D, but they require a lot of decisions that you have to make right off the bat. As fighter, you don't make a lot of decisions at level 1. These decisions kind of get added in later. But clerics and warlocks, because of how those characters work, they have to make a lot of decisions at level 1. And so if you don't want to make a lot of decisions on your very first day of playing D&D, then maybe shy away from clerics and warlocks. Monks, rogues, and wizards require a lot of juggling to play. They have a lot of unique elements to playing them. Wizards because they have a lot of spells. Monks and rogues because there are a lot of weird rules that apply just to them. Perfectly fine to pick these, but just know that it's going to require more work to keep track of all the rules. Fighter, not a lot to keep track of. Sorcerer, not a whole lot to keep track of. Okay, so after you pick your character's class, what's next? Though it may seem counterintuitive, then you pick what your character did before they became an adventurer. So you kind of build their background, their history, as one of the last things that you do. There are different descriptions for this, and backgrounds are not as important as you might think. Basically, what backgrounds do is they give you two new skills. You already probably have some skills already by the time... I'll describe skills in a minute. It's where you get your languages from. It's where you get tool proficiencies, like your ability to use thieves' tools or woodworking tools or anything like that. And you get a little bit of equipment from your background. Most of your equipment you get from your class. You get a little bit of equipment from your background. And there are a bunch of different backgrounds. They're all listed on 127 through 141. Again, don't feel bound by the flavor text surrounding the background. They all have this name that's very suggestive, like Hermit. And then it describes what kinds of stuff you get as a hermit. Does that mean your character had to live out in the woods? No, if you can think of some other reason why your character would have the hermit proficiencies, then that's fine. You don't have to stick with the exact language. Also, the Player's Handbook gives you rules for customizing backgrounds, and I'm fine with that too. Though if you do that, you should probably run it past one of the DMs. It's not okay to customize a background that is more powerful than the others, right? So it has to follow the rules set out for customizing backgrounds. Backgrounds give 2 skill proficiencies. They give 2 total languages or tool proficiencies. So 2 languages, 2 tool proficiencies, or one of each. And it gives a little bit of equipment that's comparable to that listed for the options. So if you want to make up your own background, that's fine. Just clear it with one of the DMs. Okay. Lastly, let's talk about ability scores. In the Player's Handbook, it actually does the ability scores first, but I don't think anyone makes characters that way, at least not usually. Usually you decide you want to play a fighter or a paladin or a wizard first, then you figure out your ability scores so that it matches what you wanted to play. Sometimes, I like rolling my ability scores first and then figuring out what kind of class would be good with those ability scores, but I don't think many people do it that way. The ability scores are the 6 numbers that determine your character's raw potential as an adventurer. There's 6 numbers that range from 3 to 18. So 3 is the lowest you can have, 18 is the highest you can have, at least initially. I'll leave it to the book to describe what these mean. I have opinions on the subtle difference between intelligent and wisdom, and exactly what charisma means, and exactly what dexterity means, but that's really not for this video. Maybe I'll make another video about what the ability scores mean to me, but the book can tell you. It's these 6 that matter, and they matter differently depending on what class you are. That's why most people do this last. If you want to be a paladin, say, then you want strength, because you want to be able to swing that sword strongly. If you're a paladin, you'll want constitution to be high, because you'll want them to be able to take a lot of hits. You want them to be healthy. And you want charisma to be high, because that's how a paladin casts her spells, right? So which one of those should be the highest is a juggling act. You'll have to think about what kind of paladin you want to build, but the abilities that are important depend on the class that you have. Okay, how do we get ability scores? There are 6 numbers that range from 3 to 18 each. How do we get them? Wait, why isn't this first? Again, I just said, why don't we roll ability scores? You can roll ability scores first, but I think most people don't think about what their ability scores are going to be until they've already decided their class and their race, that sort of thing. So the usual method of doing ability scores is a dice rolling method. You roll 4 6-sided dice and then drop the lowest one. That leaves you with the 3 highest of the 4 dice you just rolled. Then you add those together, and that's an ability score. That's why they range from 3 to 18, because the lowest you can have is if you rolled 4 ones, then you drop the lowest one. Doesn't matter which one you drop, they're all ones, and you get 1, 2, 3. Or you rolled 3 6s and something else. Say 3 6s and a 4. You drop the 4, you add those 3 6s together, you get 18. It's more often something in between. It's rare to get a 3. It's rare to get an 18. Do this in the presence of a DM or it didn't happen, right? We have to see the dice roll. And you do this 6 times, and you generate 6 scores. Once you have your 6 scores, you pick which one's going to be strength, which one's going to be dex, which one's going to be con, which is going to be intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, right? Depending on which ones you want to be, which ones it's important to you are better than the others. And then your race will give you bonuses to your ability scores as well, right? A human, for example, gets +1 to everything. Unless you play as the variant human, in which case you get +1 to 2 that you pick, and then you get some other bonus stuff. Right? And that's it. Why not roll? Why use these other methods? Well, there are 2 other methods for generating ability scores where you don't roll at all. One is the book just gives you 6 numbers, 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8, and you just pick which one's going to be strength, which one's going to be dex, which one's going to blah, 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 until you've got all 6 of your numbers assigned. Then you add the bonuses from race, and there you go. Those are your scores. There's also a more complicated point-buy system where you could really fine-tune what you want the numbers to be, where if you want one number to be higher, it forces other numbers to be lower. And it's not super complex, but I'm not going to describe it here. It's in the Players Handbook on page 13. It says how to do that. Why not roll? This is Dungeons & Dragons, after all. We roll dice. So why use these sets? Well, because rolls can go bad, and if you decide to roll, you must use those stats. You don't get to re-roll. You don't get to roll 20 different characters and then pick the one you want to play, because then everyone will end up with way overpowered characters, and it won't be fun. So rolls can go bad. If you are risk-averse, then maybe you think, well, I'll just go with these middle-of-the-road numbers. And these are pretty middle-of-the-road. These are numbers that are not bad. They're not fantastic either. They are good. You will have fun playing with these. But if you roll, you might roll a really low-powered character. I've done that before, and I actually like it. I like playing underpowered characters. It makes you creative. It's fun. You might also roll an overpowered character. That can be fun, too. So rolls are fun, but if you're risk-averse, then these systems are available for you. Or if you want a backup character. Why? Because I'm only going to allow 1 character per player at a time that has rolled for stats. Why? I want to avoid people rolling 10 characters and then picking... If you roll 10 characters, one of them is going to be overpowered. Just odds are. And so if I let people roll as many characters as they like, then someone is going to game that system. So I only allow people to have 1 character at a time that has rolled for stats. So if you want a backup character, that is, you want a character that's ready to step in if your character dies, and you don't want to take time to make a new one, you just want one ready, always at the ready. Or if you've been playing for a while and you're level 5 and you have a friend that just joined the game and they're level 1, and you want a level 1 player to go and play with your friend with, that's fine. You can make a second character, but they'll have to use either the point-buy system or the number set. Or you might want to use the point-buy system if you have specific views about well-rounded or min-maxed characters. This set's kind of in between. It's not well-rounded. I mean, 15's high and 8 is low. So one stat is high, and you might want someone who wants all their stats to be right in the middle. Maybe you want a well-rounded character. Or you might want the opposite, what's called a min-maxed character, where some of the stats have been maxed out, and in order to do that, others are at their bare minimum. There are advantages and disadvantages to both styles of play, and I know partisans of both. And so if you have specific views, you can make sure that that happens if you use the point-buy system. Whereas if you roll for stats, you never know. Maybe you'll end up with all high, all low, some low, most all in the middle except one that's really high. You end up with random things when you roll, and you can avoid that if you use the point-buy system. Or if you want to have fun building characters and you don't want to have a DM there to roll the dice, you can use this. Okay, that's ability scores. What's the other decision you have to make when creating a character? The other main decision, and it's actually something that you do throughout character creation. I've just saved it for the end because you do it when you pick your class, you do it when you pick your background, and that's deciding your proficiencies. So what's a proficiency? So let's describe a little bit what happens during the gameplay of D&D. When your character attempts to do something risky, you'll roll dice. You'll usually roll a 20-sided die. Say you want to climb a cliff. And so that would be strength, right? You're using strength. You use, dexterity probably too, but let's say strength is the primary ability you are using when you climb a cliff. So you'll roll the dice, and you will add a bonus that's based on your ability score. So maybe you get a +2 because you have a strength of 15. So, wait, would 15 do it? Yes. So if you have strength of 15, you would get a +2 to any rolls that involve strength. There's a chart in the book that tells you exactly what the ability bonuses are for each score. And so there will be a number you have to hit in order to successfully climb the cliff. So let's say that number is 15. And you roll a 14, but you get 14 +2 because you're strong. So you did it. You rolled over 15, so you successfully climb the cliff. Sometimes, in addition to adding your ability bonus, you'll also add a proficiency bonus if you're proficient in the task you're attempting. So let's say, and there's a whole list on the character sheet of different skills you can be proficient at. One of them is athletics. And your DM might decide that in climbing this cliff, it's not just strength, but also athletics. So if you're proficient in athletics, you also get to add the proficiency bonus. The proficiency bonus changes depending on what level you are. But at level 1, you don't have to worry about it too much. It's just +2. So you'd get another +2. So your roll of 14 would actually be 18. All right, because you get +2 for strength and another +2 from the proficiency bonus. All right. So one of the most important fiddly decisions that you make at level 1, and I think here's one where there are better choices than others depending on who you are. You have to think, how do I play to my strengths here? If I picked a strong character, then should I pick skills that complement that? Or should I shore up weaknesses? If I have a character who's not very smart, should I pick skills that make up for that? And I think usually the former strategy is the better one. Playing to your strengths in D&D is usually better than shoring up your weaknesses. Why? Because you'll have other party members to shore up your weaknesses. If your character is not very smart, then maybe you shouldn't pick history as a skill, because you'll have a wizard on your team who is smart and did pick history as a skill. Now they're really going to be good at history, whereas you would have only been a little bit good at it. So picking the skills is an important thing to do. The character sheet gives you a space to write down the totals of common pairings of proficiency and ability. So say there's a little bubble that you fill in when you are proficient in a skill. So let's say you choose to be proficient in athletics, then you fill in a little bubble next to that. And next to there is going to be a little blank where you would write down both the ability bonus, your strength bonus, plus the proficiency bonus, which is +2 at level 1. So you'd have +4. If you had +2 strength and you're proficient in athletics, then you would have +4 written down there. Some people think that number is their proficiency bonus. No, that number is just helpful so that you don't have to do a lot of arithmetic during the game. But that number is not the important number. The important number is the proficiency bonus. All right, if none of that made sense, don't worry about it too much. Just pick the skills that are allowed by your class and your background that you think would complement the personality and abilities of your character. And that's it. Those are the important features for designing your character. The only other thing that comes up is starting equipment. And starting equipment is determined by your class and your background. When you're building your character, your class will tell you get this kind of equipment, and your background says you get to start off with this kind of stuff. There is an option in the equipment chapter that said instead of doing that, you can just start off with a certain amount of gold, and you can just go shopping. There's a big list in the book of items between 145 and 150. It lists all the items you can buy. And instead of getting the equipment that you were assigned by your background and your class, you can just shop for whatever equipment you want with the amount of gold that you start with. We're not doing that. That's too complex. And equipment just doesn't matter enough in this game to make that make sense. So we're not using the starting wealth option. Instead, you get the equipment assigned by your class and your background. Like I said before, I'm not going to magically take away your equipment. There's not going to be a shipwreck and you come to shore and all your stuff is gone. No, you'll have your stuff at the beginning of the game. Your background will give you some amount of money. I think it's between 5 gold pieces and 25 gold pieces, depending on the background that you chose. Feel free to spend the gold granted by your background before the session. So here you can do a little bit of shopping. If you want a few things and you have enough gold to buy them, given your background, then the prices are listed 145 through 150, and so just subtract that gold from your inventory and add whatever item you wanted to buy to your inventory. Don't worry about rations, water skins, that kind of thing. We're going to assume that people have enough food to eat in the world. We're not playing a survival game where we're tracking how many days of food people are carrying on them, so don't worry about that stuff too much. And in general, don't worry about starting equipment too much at all. Right? The real good stuff is discovered through play. So if you just take the starting equipment that's given by your class and your background, you'll have what you need. All right, that's character making. Let's end this video, which has already gone on too long, I apologize. Let's end this video by talking about alignment. So the alignment system is a system that is supposed to help remind you of the differences between your character and you. So when we first start playing D&D, a lot of people just play a more heroic version of themselves. They just take their own beliefs and goals and they put those on a character that is a hero. But as we play more and more, we often start wanting to branch out and playing characters that are different than ourselves. And alignment was a way to help remind us of what the goals are of the character. Now, I'm not going to explain the alignment system. I mean, here it is. It's one of the more contentious things in D&D. People argue over what good versus evil mean, what lawful versus chaotic mean, what a real chaotic neutral character would be like. And there's fun stuff to say about that, and I have said a lot on it, and if you want to get into a conversation about alignment, I'm always happy to do that. But maybe here's not the place. This is a system for describing what your character is like. Do they care about civilization and law, or do they, or are they opposed to those sorts of forces? Are they selfish and always looking out for themselves, willing to harm others to benefit themselves, or do they sacrifice themselves for the good of others? So whether someone is good or evil, whether they're lawful or chaotic, means different things to different people. The book gives a description of each of them, and each edition of Dungeons and Dragons slightly changes what they mean by alignment. This is a way to write down what, just in 2 letters, LG for lawful good or CN for chaotic neutral. You can just write down really quickly a guide to remembering what your character is like. Maybe you wouldn't behave in a certain way, but a chaotic good character would, and so it's a helpful reminder. So alignment is a system that does this, but it's not necessarily the best system. For one thing, a character's alignment is not an excuse to be a problem player. Just because you wrote down chaotic neutral doesn't mean you get to go around doing random things, especially random things that would harm other characters or cause other players at the table to have a bad time. I was just playing my character, or I'm just playing my alignment is not an excuse to be a jerk, right? So remember, there are many ways to play any particular alignment. Someone could be, say, neutral good. They're neutral between law and chaos, maybe because they don't care. They just don't care about civilization versus the wilderness. And so it's because they're ambivalent, they're neutral. Or maybe they're neutral because they're torn, because they have powerful reasons to want to be lawful, but also powerful reasons to want to be chaotic. And those two neutral good characters are really different from each other. There are all kinds of different lawful good characters. I mean, most real people are lawful good. I mean, that sounds lame, but it's true. Most of us, we may have differing views on what the laws ought to be, but we tend to think civilization is a good thing. The absolute destruction of civilization and going, Mad Max is a bad place to live in, right? The Walking Dead is a bad place to live in. Civilization's a good thing, and it may have features that we would like to see changed, but generally people tend to be lawful. And they tend to be good. That doesn't mean we're all super altruistic, but we're not going to spitefully hurt other people just to advance our own interests. Does that mean everyone's lawful good? No, but most of us are, and so it's okay to be lawful good. It's okay to play that character because I figure that's the way most people are. But people can be lawful good in different ways. You can imagine two people, both of which are lawful good, but each serve a different law, and those laws are opposed, and so these two characters are opposed even though they have the same alignment. So alignment's fun. It's not clear exactly how useful it is. I think it's a necessary part of D&D. I think even though there are no mechanics behind it, I think every character should write down their alignment just because it's unique to D&D and it's interesting. But it may not be the best way to fully understand your character's personality. To do that, you can use any system you like. If you have a different way of reminding yourself of your character's personality, go ahead and do it. 5th edition introduces the Ideals, Bonds, and Flaws system, which is part of the background of your character. I think that's okay. It's useful. If you're a new player, that can be a good way. So it's when you design your character's background, there are a list of different ideals, bonds, and flaws. And if you write those down, that can be a reminder of, oh yeah, my character's not me. They have these other things that are important to them, and those are listed there. Or you can use a fictional character as your guide. Now, earlier in this video, I said it would be a bad idea to use Spider-Man as your template for the mechanics of how you create your character. But I think when it comes to describing the personality of your character, Spider-Man's just fine. You can say, okay, what would Spider-Man do in this situation? I mean, obviously there's no Spider-Man in D&D, but what would someone with Spider-Man's beliefs and Spider-Man's drives and motivations, what would they do in this situation? What would Han Solo do? Your character's not Han Solo. There is no Han Solo in D&D, but you could have a character who is like Han Solo. And so you could just ask, not what would I do in this situation? What would Han Solo do in this situation? Or you could use a real-world belief system. I don't know if my character is a Kantian constructivist or something, or use a religion or something like that exists in the real world and think, okay, even though that doesn't exist in the D&D world, I can ask, what would someone with that kind of belief system do in the world? That's fine. Or use one from a different fictional world. I mean, there are no Jedi or Sith because the Force doesn't exist in D&D. The magic doesn't work the way in D&D that it does in Star Wars. But you can think, what would an analog to someone who has the mentality of a Jedi? What would the mentality of someone has the... what would someone do who has the mentality that is the analog of a Sith? What would they do? So if you have a different fictional system and you understand the different kinds of moral universes there, then yeah, import that. That's fine. This isn't building a Jedi character. You can't do that. But you can say my character is like a Jedi in their beliefs, and so I can use my knowledge of this other fictional world to help remind myself of what my character would do. Whatever helps you understand what's important to your character, right? I think is fine. But then write down your alignment too. This is D&D after all. Remember that alignment and any other system you might use is descriptive, not prescriptive. It's not like your ability scores. Your ability to score describes something intrinsic to your character. Your character is this strong. They are this charismatic. Your alignment is not set in stone. Your alignment is just a reminder to the player that their character is different from them. So it's not something you must play in accordance with. You don't have to play in accordance with the alignment you wrote down. Of course, if you start diverging from the alignment you wrote down, don't be surprised if your DM says you should change what you wrote down. If you wrote down lawful evil because you thought that sounded fun, But then when you're playing the game, your character's always doing good things. They sacrifice their own wealth to help others. They endanger themselves to help their fellow party members. That is, they behave like a good person. Your DM might say, "Yeah, I know you wrote down lawful evil, but you're actually more like chaotic good." And those discussions are fun, and that's part of the fun of alignment. So don't be surprised if your character actually doesn't end up living up to what you thought they were going to be when you wrote down the alignment. Like in fiction, if you're an author, you discover your characters through writing. In D&D, you discover your characters through playing. And sometimes the character you end up discovering isn't the same as the one you set out to make. It's okay for your character to change and grow over the course of play. Maybe they have one kind of personality at the beginning and they have a character arc. In fiction, characters often have arcs where their personality changes, and the same is true in D&D. All right, sorry for the long video. I hope that either you enjoyed all of that or you were able to skip around to the part that you did enjoy. Hopefully we'll all be playing soon and have fun making your characters. Take care.